If your car won't start and doesn't even attempt to crank, you're dealing with no crank, no start problem. We'll walk through the most common causes, step-by-step diagnostic procedures, and effective repair techniques. When we say no crank, no start, we're referring to a situation where turning the key does not cause the engine to turn over or crank. This problem is different from a cranks but won't start scenario, which typically involves issues with the ignition or fuel system. Watch this video here if you have cranks but won't start problem. Here, we're focused on problems that prevent the starter motor from cranking the engine. Let's see the step-by-step diagnosis techniques. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. 1. Dead or weak battery. The most common reason for a no crank, no start condition is a dead or weak battery. Start by inspecting the battery terminals. Look for corrosion or loose connections. Clean the terminals if they are corroded and ensure the cables are tightly secured. Use a digital multimeter to check the battery voltage. Place the red lead on the positive terminal and the black lead on the negative terminal. A fully charged battery should read around 12.6 volts. If it reads less than 12 volts, the battery may not have enough power to run the starter motor. Check the electrolyte levels in your battery if it's not a maintenance-free battery. Low electrolyte levels can cause a weak battery. You can try jump-starting the vehicle. If the engine starts, let it run for about 15 minutes to recharge the battery. If it doesn't recharge, the battery may be completely dead and need replacement. You can also employ headlight test. Turn on the headlights and attempt to start the engine. If the headlights dim significantly or go out, the battery might be undercharged or there could be a short in the starting circuit. 2. Bad starter motor. A faulty starter can manifest in various ways. This can be explained by the sound heard in cabin. 1. No sound at all. If there is no sound when attempting to start the car, the battery may be completely dead. This can occur if the car has been sitting idle for an extended period, the battery is old, or something has drained the battery, such as leaving the lights on overnight. Corroded or loose battery terminals, poor ground connection, or failed relay can also be the case. 2. Rapid clicking sound. This often indicates that the battery has some charge left, but not enough to engage the starter motor fully. This might happen due to a weakened battery, poor battery connections, or issues with the alternator. This also happens if the starter solenoid is faulty, as it may click as it attempts to engage the starter motor, but fails to crank the engine. 3. Whirring sound. A whirring sound when you attempt to start your car can be a sign that the starter solenoid mechanism is worn out or malfunctioning. If the solenoid is worn or faulty, it may fail to push the pinion gear far enough to mesh properly with the flywheel. Instead of cranking the engine, the starter motor spins freely, producing a whirring sound. This sound indicates that the starter motor is running, but isn't able to engage with the engine to start it, or it might not stay engaged long enough to crank the engine. This problem typically requires replacing the starter solenoid or the entire starter assembly, depending on the vehicle's design and the severity of the wear. 4. Buzzing sound. A buzzing sound when attempting to start the car usually points to poor current flow through the electrical system. This issue can be caused by a low battery charge, corroded battery terminals, and loose connections. When the battery is low on charge, it doesn't provide enough power to properly engage the starter solenoid or motor. A stuck solenoid or relay that is not allowing full electrical current to pass through to the starter motor can also cause this sound. 5. Grinding noise. This noise is typically caused by the pinion gear on the starter motor grinding against the teeth of the flywheel. Several factors can cause this grinding sound. Loose starter motor. If the starter motor is not securely mounted to the engine block, it may move slightly out of alignment when it tries to engage with the flywheel. This misalignment can cause the pinion gear to grind against the flywheel teeth instead of meshing smoothly. Damaged flywheel or pinion gear teeth. If the teeth on either the flywheel or the pinion gear are worn or damaged, the gears will not engage properly. This can create a grinding noise as the damaged teeth scrape against each other. To resolve this issue, the starter motor may need to be resecured or replaced, and the flywheel or pinion gear may need to be inspected for damage. 6. Loud single click or clunk. This click indicates that the solenoid is successfully pushing the pinion gear to engage with the flywheel. One common issue in this scenario is failed motor brushes within the starter motor. Over time, brushes can wear down or become damaged, preventing the starter motor from receiving the necessary electrical current to turn over the engine. In rare cases, a single loud click may indicate that the engine itself is seized, meaning that internal components have locked up, preventing any movement. 7. Unusual smell or smoke. If there is a burning smell or smoke when attempting to start the car, this could indicate an electrical short or overload in the starter motor, battery cables, or other electrical components. This is a serious issue and should be addressed immediately to prevent damage or fire. 3. Bad ignition switch. A faulty ignition switch can prevent the starter from receiving power. Here's how to diagnose it. Check the dashboard lights. When you insert the key into the ignition and turn it to the on position without starting the engine, the dashboard lights, such as the check engine light, oil light, and battery light, should illuminate. If the dashboard lights do not illuminate, this could indicate that the ignition switch is not sending power to the vehicle's electrical system. If the dashboard lights do illuminate, this suggests that the ignition switch is at least providing some power to the electrical system. However, this does not completely rule out an issue with the ignition switch, so further tests are required. Perform the headlight test for the ignition switch to determine if it can handle a load. With the ignition key still in the on position, turn on the headlights. While the headlights are on, turn the ignition key to the start position as if you're trying to start the car. If the headlights dim noticeably, this is generally a good sign. It indicates that the ignition switch is successfully engaging the starter motor, drawing a heavy current, which is why the lights dim. In this case, the ignition switch is likely functioning properly. If the headlights do not dim, this suggests that the ignition switch may not be sending the signal to the starter, or there could be an issue with the electrical circuit. In this situation, the ignition switch could still be faulty, and further testing is required to confirm. 4. Bad starter relay or blown fuse. If the ignition switch seems to be working from the previous tests, but the car still doesn't start, the next step is to test the power flow at the starter relay. The relay is typically found in the fuse box under the hood. With the key turned to the start position, use a multimeter to check for voltage at the relay terminals. Place the multimeter leads on the relay's input terminal to check if there is power when the key is turned to the start position. If there is no voltage, this may indicate that the ignition switch is not sending power to the starter relay, confirming a potential fault in the switch. To rule out the possibility of a bad relay, swap the suspected faulty starter relay with a similar one from the fuse box. Often there is a relay with the same specifications used for another system, like the horn or headlights. Try starting the car again. If the car starts with a swapped relay, the original relay was likely faulty, not the ignition switch. If it still doesn't start, further diagnosis is needed, focusing back on the ignition switch or wiring. 5. Wiring and connection issues. Check all wiring and connections between the battery, starter, ignition switch, and related components. Loose or corroded connections can cause a no-start condition. 6. Neutral safety switch or clutch pedal switch. Neutral safety switch for automatic transmissions. This switch prevents the car from starting unless it's in park or neutral. If the car doesn't start, try shifting to neutral and then attempt to start again. Clutch pedal switch. For manual transmissions, the clutch pedal switch must be engaged for the car to start. If the switch is faulty, the car won't start. Test the switch by checking for continuity with a multimeter. 7. Security system issue. Some vehicles have an immobilizer or security system that can prevent the car from starting if it doesn't recognize the key. Ensure that the security system isn't engaged and that your key is correctly programmed. 8. Seized engine. Use a large ratchet or breaker bar to try turning the engine manually by rotating the bolt at the center of the crankshaft pulley. If the engine is too hard to turn or doesn't turn at all, it could be seized and need professional attention. Support me by subscribing to the channel.